Thank you for joining, everyone. The last one of these we had was on the 4th of December, which was the week after the launch of the all-party parliamentary group for fair elections, and was the day after the historic vote by Parliament in favour of PR, historic symbolic vote for the 10-minute rule bill, proposing PR for general elections and the English local elections. And quite a lot's happened since then. So mainly today, we just want to give a bit of an update about what's happened in the parliamentary campaign, touch on some of the sort of wider political developments as well, and particularly those relating to electoral reform, and talk a little bit about sort of grassroots action as well, both inside and beyond the party. I am joined by Laura, who is on the call and can wave. Say hello.
Am I on? Have I got sound? Oh,
Yes,
I have got sound. God, you'd have thought I'd have learnt this by now, wouldn't you? Anyway, there you go. Hi, great to see so many of you, particularly some of you second night in a row, as you'll have been at the MVM event as well yesterday, which went brilliantly well. So
yes,
really great. Yeah, really, really, really good. I'm sure we'll touch on that later, but we do appreciate those of you who are giving 2 nights in a row to this. So hi.
And Alex, we've got on the call as well.
Hi everyone, good to see you all.
Cool. So yeah, we'll give a bit of an update. I mean, the main sort of intervention about PR that has happened in Parliament since the last one of these is this big backbench business debate on PR, which happened on the 30th of January. So this kind of came out of the 10-minute rule debate, 10-minute rule motion vote, and the launch of the call for a national commission that the APPG did in November. Basically, we sort of put that call out for the national commission. We had a very, very brief debate on the 3rd of December, followed by a vote in favour of PR. But there was really no scope within that to actually air the arguments or show the sort of breadth or depth of support amongst MPs. So, I mean, we attended and supported a meeting of the APPG officers where we had a bit of a discussion about parliamentary strategy towards the end of December. And basically it was decided that the best way forward is for the next intervention to be one of these, what is called a backbench business debate. Now, the kind that they went for is basically one that happens in the Commons chamber. They can happen in Westminster Hall as well, in a committee room, which isn't quite so sort of high profile and doesn't have quite the same status. To get a major debate in the Commons, you basically have to go along as a group of MPs and apply for one to this backbench business committee. And so Alex Sobel, Labour MP, our APPG chair, put in an application for one of those, who was supported by 41 cross-party MPs, one from every region and nation of the UK, which is a really significant number. You know, for a big Commons chamber debate, you're meant to have at least 15 MPs, so 41 is really good going. And they were granted one. They were granted a debate on the 30th of January. I mean, Alex might want to elaborate on this a bit, but we basically think it's important that debate was, I mean, it was co-sponsored by lots of different parties, but it was led by a Labour MP. And, you know, it's great to see the Liberal Democrat MPs pushing for electoral reform, as they have done for a very long time. It's great to see Sarah Olney putting forward her 10-minute rule bill in December, but really we need to draw attention to the fact that this is very much a Labour cause and something that Labour MPs are completely behind. So it's great to see Alex actually leading that debate and giving the opening speech. We're going to play a clip from the opening speech. While I'm getting that up, do you want to add anything on that front, Alex?
Yeah, just to add that, like, the Labour representation of that debate was really strong. Usually these backbench debates don't have huge numbers, but we got to the point where they had to do timed speeches in order to fit everyone in, which is a really good sign of attendance. And we had like over a dozen speeches in favour. We had 12 in favour from Labour MPs and just one Labour MP speaking against, and all the other speeches, apart from the opposition front bench, were in favour from across the House. So that's given us loads of campaign material as well to put on socials. So I'll let Joe show you a little bit of that.
The application. It is right that the House should give time to consider proportional representation for general elections to this place. People can tell when they're being ignored. They can also smell unfairness a mile away. First past the post means people's votes are not equal in value. I sometimes fear that we in this place are used to this level of gross unfairness in elections, and that we have become numb to it. But for millions of people, their stake in national politics is the vote that they get to cast in a general election every few years. And when they see a party who won 2 million votes get 4 MPs, or a party who won 4 million votes get 5 MPs, it's clear to them the system isn't fair. It drives voters into the margins or from voting at all. If we in Westminster are really content to say that's just the way it is, then it's no wonder hardly anyone trusts politics. Back in the mid-20th century, parties needed close to 50% of the vote to win a majority of seats, but this threshold has been falling to new lows for decades. 39% in 1974, 35% in 2005, and as I said, 1/3 last year. And there's every reason to think this trend will continue. When a party, even an extreme party, can win a huge majority of less than 1/3 of the vote, it's not just senseless, it's dangerous. This is unsustainable, and I think the government knows it is unsustainable. The policy platform for our manifesto, it stated, the flaws in the current voting system are contributing to the distrust and alienation we see in politics. The Prime Minister has made clear that restoring trust in politics is a key priority, calling the fight for trust the battle that defines our age. If the government is to win the battle, it must address our flawed voting system. A voting system it knows is driving distrust and alienation of politics. A voting system means millions of people's votes don't count. A voting system that most people don't want to continue with. That's why I urge the government to take this first step by establishing a National Commission for Electoral Reform, as recommended by the APPG for Fair Elections, which I chair.
So I'm sure most people here will probably agree with most of that. And it's really great as well that we've had not just Alex standing up and giving a really strong speech and spearheading this, but also that we've had some of the new cohort of the 2024 intake of Labour MPs making it clear that this is something that's got really widespread support amongst a new generation of MPs. I think Joe's also got a video from Anna Dixon, who's another brilliant MP from the Yorkshire and Humber region. She's MP for Shipley, as many of you will know.
As a member of the Labour campaign for electoral reform and of the APPG Fair Elections, it's a real privilege to be speaking in this debate. Everyone should have the chance to vote, and everyone have their vote count. And it pains me that here we are in 2025 in Britain, and that those things are not true. So for all sorts of reasons, we've found ourselves in a situation where people don't feel their votes count, and this is breeding distrust in politics. Just 12% of people in this country trust political parties. We have to reverse this. People must feel that their voice counts. And it doesn't help when political parties campaign only in marginal seats. I saw as a young adult politics student in Germany how PR led to more stable government. My work in health and social care, I saw governments elected under PR in the Netherlands and Germany pursuing long-term strategic policies on key issues like social care reform, where I know we have much in common across this place. Consensual and collaborative politics. We know the public don't like it, the heckling and the braying, which is obviously common in this place on a Wednesday lunchtime. But some of the best debates have been where we've been in some agreement, the climate and nature discussions, the violence against women and girls debates. With a system of PR, I hope that we would also have better politics. And that's why I support the establishment of a National Commission for Electoral Reform. I believe that the government could get on the front foot, show it's serious about addressing our unrepresented voting system, and stem this rise in disengagement and distrust in politics. We could bring the public with us and rebuild the trust in our democracy. Thank you.
So you'll have heard there that Anna was calling, amongst other things, for a national commission for electoral reform, which, as Joe mentions, was the kind of one of the key asks of the all-party parliamentary group when it launched back in November. And it provides us with a really key, tangible, incremental focal point for the government to take this forward in this parliamentary term. And it also means that we're organising MPs behind that as a single kind of key ask, rather than having all this kind of nascent support, which has historically been the case, but without a kind of key inflection point where we're asking something of the government. Of the kind of speeches in favour on the day, on the 30th of January, most of those speaking in favour called for a national commission for electoral reform. And in the following kind of social media coverage, those of you who've follow our social media channels will have seen we had quotes from many Labour MPs who weren't able to be there on the day, but were happy to call for a national commission. So we're organising support around that key ask and trying to make it clear how widespread there is support for it. I think Joe has got some quote cards of some of those, and it's worth also, just kind of noting that there were cross-party calls for that as well from the Lib Dems and the Greens, and I believe even Richard Tice, who spoke at the debate, called for a national commission, which I've got mixed feelings about, I have to say, but hey. Yeah, so
I'm not actually sure Richard Tice called for a national commission, but he did intervene. We'll get on to reform a little bit later on, where there's some interesting things happening. You don't have to read all of these, but this is just to give you a sort of flavour of some of the other calls people are putting out. It's really encouraging to hear, such great speeches basically coming from Labour MPs and setting out all the arguments so clearly. And as Alex has said, there's many others we could have played. You might have seen in the background on those videos people like Luke Akehurst and Floresh Loby sitting on the benches, many more. Laura?
Yeah, it might be worth just saying, I think if you have the chance to go and look at some of this, that Luke Akehurst's contribution was really excellent. Some of you will have heard him at Labour Party conference a couple of years ago. He's extremely sort of fluent in all of the arguments. And I sort of note this for a couple of reasons. One, just in and of itself, it was a very good contribution. But the other thing is it won't have escaped the attention of close Labour watchers that he's also someone who is close to leadership circles. And I think, although we know it's difficult for cabinet ministers and we know it's difficult for PPSs, notionally it's difficult for loyalists. And I think that this debate showed that actually that's not the case. Luke is one of the most loyal to the leadership people in the whole of the party. So if your own MP is a little bit shy and they need a bit of encouragement, and they're perhaps on what we might call the Starmer or moderate or former Labour right, or, the terminology will be different depending where you are and who you're talking to. Do encourage them to watch that, because it really belies the myth that you can't have an opinion on this, and you absolutely can. So if your own MP is a bit shy and still needs a bit of a prod, then I encourage them to watch all of those contributions, but particularly perhaps to have a look at Luke's. And I just want to give a little shout out to our friends from other parties. Joe's mentioned already the great turnout from the Lib Dems. The Greens, of course, have only got 4 people. The fact that a quarter of their party still made it to the debate is really good. But Alex and Joe have really made huge progress in cooperation with our friends from other parties, which is going to be an increasing feature of our work over coming months and years. And there are some people also in the cross-party campaigns. We mentioned MVM before, also Open Britain, who are also really putting a lot of weight into this effort. I think it's Labour-led, but it is really good that it's Labour-led with a broad coalition of support behind it, which is obviously exactly the spirit of the sort of politics that most people who want PR also want. But we've got some brilliant people in the sort of Sandy's equivalent. So Sandy Martin, I think, is here from the Labour campaign for electoral reform. His counterpart in the Lib Dems for electoral reform is really excellent, and the work behind the scenes with them is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we move on from the parliamentary debate side of things, one other point I want to mention is sometimes people have watched the clips or had a look at the debate and said, why is the chamber kind of half empty? That's very, very normal during like a backbench business debate. This was, relatively speaking, a really well attended one. I mean, this was a 2.5 hour long debate, and it didn't stop throughout that whole thing, and it would have continued had there been more time to continue. On this sort of debate, having 20 MPs speaking in favour is really, really good. And as Alex mentions, with just one person speaking against, it's just overwhelming. Very similar, actually, I think, to the debate that we had at the Labour Party conference in 2021. Those of you who remember that. Okay, so we'll come on to a discussion in a little bit, but just to update on a couple of other things first. Obviously, we're in a moment of sort of huge uncertainty internationally. I was just listening into the Trump cabinet live broadcast that was happening just a few moments before joining this call, and hearing about Elon Musk accidentally cutting off Ebola funding for a few moments and then turning it back on. There's a lot going on that's very worrying, and there's this rise of the far right internationally. We had the German elections just on Sunday, which in my view is a very clear illustration of on the one hand the rising far right everywhere, on the other hand the fact that a proportional system is the best system to deal with that. You have to deal with it in tangible, real life sort of political ways, whatever system you have, but a system in which you can't turn 20-30% of the vote into a very large share of seats is always going to be very preferable. In that context, we've heard some really quite surprising things over the last week or so. I think from people in the UK. Obviously, Reform UK, the party, have been nominally and officially committed to PR for quite some time. We heard Richard Tice spoke in favour during the debate in Parliament. We're not convinced, frankly. I mean, there's a real question as to how sort of sincere any sort of support is from Farage. We as Labour for New Democracy just don't see him as a Democrat. And it was interesting that last week when he was being interviewed, and we've got a short clip of this as well, being interviewed on Sky Australia, he basically started to sort of indicate that he may be changing his position on electoral reform. And this is particularly interesting because it's something that Reform has been split over in the past. In the vote on the 3rd of December, I think 2 of Reform's MPs voted in favour. Farage himself wasn't there, so officially abstained. And then 1 of them actually voted against, so voted in favour of first past the post. So there's clearly some dispute within the party about their position. And well, let's have a look at the clip. We've added some music for emphasis.
First past the post can be your enemy, but there comes an inversion point at which it becomes your friend. And are you there now? On the numbers, looking at not just one poll, but dozens of polls over the last few weeks, we are literally at that inflection point. So
he does look very excited about being at that inflection point. And I mean, he may not be wrong about that. Looking at the polls, we're in this fairly unprecedented situation where I don't think any party has polled above 30% since the start of the year, if that's right, or certainly sort of this month. And combining that with the points that Alex Sober was talking about in the clip of his speech, the sort of share of the vote you need in order to win a majority just falling and falling over time to its current all-time low of just 1 in 3 votes. We're moving to a situation where, I mean, it could go lower. It could be easily below 30%, and you can still get a majority depending on how the vote divides up across constituencies. So it's concerning, and I think this adds sort of impetus to the campaign, and it should certainly alarm, I think, the government and Labour and anyone who, you know, doesn't want to risk any party winning majority on that share of the vote. We've got one more video clip, which is Kemi Badenoch, who's also commented on related issues. I'm just gonna play that one too.
We're seeing a lot more fragmentation across the board. If this was a country where you had proportional representation, it would probably come out in the wash, but we don't. So you will have a party like Labour, which has won a landslide majority on 34% of the vote. That is a scandal.
It's quite something when you have a week in which Reform UK basically say that first past the post is becoming their friend, and you have the leader of the Conservative Party, I think the first leader of the Conservative Party in living memory, who basically says that first past the post has produced a scandalous outcome. So yeah, I mean, we can come back to that and discuss that. But yeah, there's a lot going on. Shall we just say a very brief word about, so inside the party, in terms of grassroots activity, we are in the process of finalising a new motion. Lewis, you asked in the chat whether the motion is going to be updated to include a call for a national commission. It certainly is. LCR, I think, will be updating theirs as well, so that, you know, all CLPs passing motions are calling for that national commission. At the same time, this is not, I think, going to be a year when we're doing a push on conference motions, and we can talk a little bit about that if people would like to, but it may be a year in which we have to do the National Policy Forum process. So there should be a consultation or set of consultations coming out soon, in which they'll ask views of party members and others on all sorts of policy issues. I'd be surprised if there is any question about democracy in there, but whether there is or not, it's really important just to show that there is grassroots support and demand continuing for electoral reform within the party. But the other side of things, which Laura alluded to a bit earlier, is the public pressure outside the party. And I mean, this is, I feel like I've been saying, watch this space in this space for quite some time, and I am going to say it again. But I mean, we you know, some of you were on the break call yesterday with Make Votes Matter, and organizations like them are doing some great work in that area. What I think is coming is a bit more of a sort of concerted push to, you know, find those MPs who we need to persuade, because we're looking at, there's maybe about 100 persuadable MPs, overwhelmingly Labour MPs, who haven't yet taken a position on electoral reform. You know, Alex is doing an amazing job going around talking to them all, making sure their colleagues in Parliament are talking to them, just doing all that sort of networking. But what's really, I think, going to move the dial on that is just getting pressure from constituents and from local voters in their area. And some of that's already happening. But I think if we all sort of get organised, then we can do quite a lot more on that front as well. So yeah, there's more to follow on that. But it's going to be a really important part of our theory of change, I think. Alex, is there anything I missed, or can we hand over to everyone else?
I think just briefly touching on like the National Commission ask, in case we haven't spoken about what the government's response has been so far. So at that 30th of January debate, the latest government line on the National Commission ask was that the government has got no plans, which is not a vast change from where we were back in December, where they're kind of just hedging effectively and kind of slightly leaving the door open in case they need to push this button. And there was, for the first time, an acknowledgement that this would require a national conversation. So you can kind of feel our language and their language getting closer together. And I think if we continue to keep up pressure and keep organised, it's definitely within striking distance.
Great, thanks, Alex. Okay, so if people have comments or questions, then please put your hands up. We have half an hour. We don't need to be on for half an hour if people don't have questions and comments, but far away. So, Robbie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. I have pretty much asked my question in the most recent set of comments, and with Lewis Colwell. Basically, I do agree with the general strategy that you're actually following, that we have to focus on the Parliamentary Labour Party whilst working with other parties is to expand on the public elements of this campaign. But the critical point that needs to be made is the collective responsibility in government principle, or that all cabinet members have, and they're all equals. The Prime Minister is no superior.
And I mean, I think we certainly have a lot more support.
I'm talking about in the actual government.
Yeah, no,
that's where our focus has to be, because if we can persuade more people to actually support or PR, it's a done deal.
And the point I was going to add is that obviously, because of that collective responsibility, although we have lots of sort of very supported people in ministerial roles, they have to be a lot more quiet about it than those who can show up for backbench business debates.
But those are the people with the powers in this. Now, I think we switch our strategy to those people. We get this through on with full government support, and that means the whips come into play.
Thanks, Robbie. So John and then Kathy, please.
Oh, hi there. I'm pleased to say my MP is Catherine Fuchs, who I know is quite supportive of this aim. Have we got a feel for the forces within the party who are resisting any moves to PR, and what we might do to counteract that?
Well, that's a very good question, and I mean, based on the evidence of the debate in Parliament the other day, there is opposition there. It's not that there's no opposition at all, but it's very limited, really, and it's sort of quite half-hearted as well. There was, as I think Alex said, there was only one backbench MP who showed up to argue against PR. And it was sort of very much sort of stale, well-trodden myths, nothing new or too convincing. And I don't know, it might just be his delivery, but it didn't feel too sort of heartfelt either. I think our bigger challenge, I'd say, rather than opposition within the party and government, is that question of is it a priority enough? The line that Keir Starmer's often given out is that it's not a priority, which is very different from it's something I fundamentally disagree with. And I think our job is really to show that it is a priority. And I think some of the developments that we've seen, some of the broader developments we alluded to, I would hope move it up people's list of priorities, just from a matter of, not just self-preservation, but sort of protecting British democracy, frankly. But also just putting that pressure on from lots of supportive Labour MPs, loyal Labour MPs, but ones who are very clear that they think we should have a commission and should start moving forward with electoral reform. That's really how we can start moving it up that priorities list.
It just sort of feels to me that this is something that this government could do a very substantive thing that this government could do without spending too much money.
Yeah.
You know, if they're looking for legacy.
Yeah, very much so. Kathy.
Hi, I'm the branch secretary for Alston Moor and Fellside, which is in the new constituency of Penrith and Solway, with a new MP, Marcus Campbell-Savers. So we're just all feeling our feet at the moment and getting to know people. My obvious question is, what can I as a branch secretary do to further this campaign? Should we be campaigning to get our MP to vote with, to get something, a motion sent to the NEC? What specifically can we do? We know the arguments, we know we're right. What do we do now?
That's great. And I'm so sorry, Kathy, but I should know this, and I'm sure Alex does, but is your MP a Labour MP?
Oh, Marcus Campbell-Savers is, yes. Sorry, I probably wasn't speaking distinctly.
No.
He's a pretty thoughtful guy as well. On the individual MPs, I can see some questions in the chat. I mean, do feel free to put these sorts of questions in the regional WhatsApp groups, and we can do some case-by-case organising.
Yeah.
I think there's a mixture of kind of reticence. Where we know we've got MPs in favour, there's some concern about the kind of reform position in the polls, and their colleagues saying to them, what are you doing? You're so naive for wanting to have 90 to 100 reform MPs in Parliament. So we need to take on that argument and say the answer to dealing with the far right is to have more democracy, not less of it. I think we need to kind of sharpen up our arguments for that when talking to MPs to make sure that they're equipped with those sorts of arguments. And I think as a kind of key ask, and we have been coordinating across the electoral reform sector, across party campaigns with this, we're trying to get those supportive MPs to join the APPG for fair elections, because that's where we're making those tangible asks. So Marcus, and I can see Luke Charters, Alison Hume in the chat as well. All three of those are worth pushing to try and get on that APPG, particularly if you're their constituents, because that's where we are. You know, that raises the profile of that as a campaign ask, and it also just means they're kind of in the loop rather than coming up with stuff on the fly, because, you know, message discipline is quite important in some of these things. We don't want people talking about things like referendums or something like that.
Thank you.
And also, I mean, that goes for everyone. If your MP isn't yet a member of the APPG, and there is a list of all of the members on the APPG website, I'll just put that in the chat. Then we want them as a member. Not everyone can join. If your MP is a minister or has a sort of real front bench role, then they won't be able to. But we do want as many as possible. Also, you can pass a motion once we've updated the text of that. Your CLP can affiliate to LCR. Yeah, and once we have the National Policy Forum consultations, then you can pass a motion or a submission if it's sort of framed as a response to that, and send that to the National Policy Forum as well. Yeah, I think those are the sort of key things within Labour. As I mentioned, there's going to be things that are sort of will invite us all to get involved as constituents rather than party members as well, hopefully coming down the line. Rick.
Thanks, Joe. I just wanted, I suppose, to reaffirm some of the things that Alex has been saying, really. I was recently at the Southwest Regional Conference and managed in the course of 2 days to have one-to-one chats with about 8 or 9 MPs. So the thing about national conferences, it's so busy and there are so many people that you can't really get to talk to any large number of MPs very easily. But if anybody's going to a regional conference, well worth trying to buttonhole some MPs, because they'll sit and talk to you. And the same, of course, goes for MPs having surgeries locally, because there's no substitute for people actually standing in front of their MP or an MP from their region and saying, well, what do you think about all this? And the big take home from that conference for me was that clearly the party is already focusing on the next general election. Never mind the local elections, it's already thinking about the next general election. And a lot of MPs are quite seriously worried about the position of reform and their growing popularity. So I think those arguments about reform and the possibility of them becoming a majority a party in Parliament are very real. And clearly the Labour Party is already considering its position on that. It's looking at other ways of defeating reform at the moment, to be honest, but at some point it may well have to decide it's going to have to do something about the electoral system simply in order to head them off at the pass. So I'll also say what Joe said, do please join LCER if you're not already a member. If you can get to your regional conference, please do go. Do send in asks to the National Campaign Forum and go and see your MP if your MP is not on the list of supporters, and say, well, why aren't you?
Thank you, Rick. Sean.
Hi. Yeah. How can, I mean, apart from lobbying individual constituency MPs, I've mentioned Luke Charters and Alison Hume in the chat, because we've already had some dealings with them in Compass and MVM. How can cross-party groups like Compass and MVM and Unlock Democracy and others in the sector contribute in an effective and coordinated way with campaigning for a national commission on electoral reform?
Well, I think there is a lot of coordinating and discussion going on amongst cross-party groups, and there is some good joined-up action ahead of the debate on the 30th of January. There was a right to MP kind of action, you know, one of those campaign actions where you put your email address in and it has a letter you can send off, or preferably edit, so it's your own words. But 11,000 people ended up sending that. That was backed by MVM, Compass, UD, Open Britain, Electoral Reform Society. Both LCR and LAND pointed people towards it as well. But as Labour campaigns, we sort of weren't official sponsors of it. But that sort of thing can be really effective. Just we've all got audiences who care about this stuff, and just linking up in that way is
obviously it's got to be sustained throughout the year, because
well, that's it. Yeah,
an increasingly urgent priority to actually get any action before the next general election.
No, I totally
have to start this year, and we need to build a proper grassroots demand, which is outside party politics in a very real sense. So, I mean, obviously, what we're trying to think of ways that we can creatively lobby our own MPs through things like online petitions and actually street stalls to collect petition signatures from the wider public. But beyond that, what can we do in a properly coordinated manner to advance the case?
Can I come in on this, Joe? Because I've had quite a lot of correspondence with you about this, Sean. What MVM are doing, actually, I think with street stalls and with various other cross-party initiatives is really, really useful. I wouldn't want to knock it at all. But Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform is entirely focused on being Labour members and Labour supporters and trying to lobby our Labour MPs. So, I'm sort of taking it that you are a member of LCR and you are a Labour Party member. And if you're lobbying your Labour MP, I think the best thing you can do actually is to write letters from constituents to members of Parliament are actually far more effective, I think, in many ways than things like petitions and street stalls, because they show individual commitment and individual initiative. And LCR is desperately trying to get all its members to write to their local Labour MP. If you've done that, that's fantastic, and we're really trying to encourage all our members to do that.
Yeah, well, we've had some response from Luke Charters in the last week, which I can actually forward to you if you're wanting to have that. He's not yet made any commitment to join the the APPG, but it's a work in progress.
Thank you, Sean. Be very interested in what he's got to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, I agree with everything Sandy said. I do also agree, Sean, though, that we do need that kind of sustained. We need to build that external pressure, and we need more of it. And I know this is why I'm being slightly sort of coy about watching this space. But I'm hopeful that there's going to be some news on stepping up that kind of grassroots pressure, and that involves some new sort of creative thinking along the lines I think you're hinting at. But I don't want to get ahead of myself.
No, well, I mean, you've recently sent out another email, and with your hat on as the strategy person for Open Britain, haven't you?
Well,
so yeah, we're watching the space.
Okay, Ivan and then Mary.
Thank you, Joe. I keep an eye on the parliamentary petitions site regularly because I like to see what are the fundamental bread and butter issues people care about. Today there was a petition published on there which is advocating for AV as opposed to PR, and the petition says that AV would maintain the direct link between the MP and the constituency, but PR would not. How do we address this when it comes up?
Well, I mean, I think that's sorry, Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a pretty common myth that many of you will be familiar with from having these conversations. There are forms of PR that keep a constituency link. AMS, STV do so, and we use them throughout the UK already. If people are really cautious, we can just describe these things as first past the post with PR added on, and then it's within their wheelhouse. I've certainly had people who are first past the post supporters say, "Oh well, I wouldn't mind the Scottish system." I'm like, yeah, that's PR. So, I think so long as we're appearing to be not kind of zealots about this stuff, people will tend to try and meet us halfway. And also, AV is a non-starter after 2011. Sorry.
Mary.
Hi. I was just going to say that the person from Penrith, was that Kathy? Her MP is the son of Dale Campbell Savers, who saw the way, which is quite similar to backing AV, of backing a system which he sort of like invented, which is supplementary votes. So if she was seeing her MP, she could ask him if he was taking after his father or he supported PR, which should be better. I think eventually the Tories are going to get round to the fact that they missed a beat by not supporting AV, especially if they want to work with Reform UK. The basic issue is, in the National Policy Forum, are we only going to talk about the National Commission, or are we going to talk about some of the policies which Labour advocated and which is actually legislating for? I mean, a bit late, but they are. In the devolution bill, in the elections bills that was coming up at the end of the year. And if anybody wants to know anything more about unlocked democracy, I'm managed by total haphazard by standing, because somebody asked me to stand and I thought I wouldn't get any votes. I'm on the unlocked democracy, and they're doing a very good webinar next week and then I think it's next week. Anyway, it's and they're also trying to get Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham together to talk about their book. And there is a point which I know isn't being stressed by the APPG, is that we need to join up the conversation about electoral reform with better bread and butter issues. And the bread and butter issues are tackled by Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham in their book Head North. So if anybody hasn't bought their birthday present for anybody who likes football and electoral reform, they should get the book.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And in answer to the question about the National Policy Forum, I mean, that's very much a Labour campaign for electoral reform lead. LCR obviously will be pushing for people to include those sort of wider democratic reform issues. Labour for a New Democracy, long-standing sort of agreement has been that this is a sort of a campaign focused only on PR for the House of Commons, and LCR, which of course also campaigns for PR for the House of Commons, but deals with all the rest as well. And when we're on that subject, yes, as you mentioned, there's the devolution bill, which is sort of at a more advanced stage. But yeah, as you say, there's going to be a white paper on basically wider election reform, which will come out, they say, before the summer. In civil service language, that could mean anything up to, you know, October, but hopefully before the summer recess. And as a white paper, then that goes out and is sort of consulted on, as the devolution white paper currently is being consulted on. We'll have to see what's in there, and we'll have to see what, you know, other things we might want to push for it to be included. But yeah, that's kind of the structure of what the government's putting forward, and those are our opportunities to try and play into that. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I know we have the LCR annual general meeting this Saturday. Sandy can, I'm sure, tell us what time it is.
Yep, so it's on Zoom. It's 10:30 in the morning. If you are a member, you will have been sent a link already, I believe, or it's going to be sent tonight. But if you are not yet a member of LCR and you want to join us at the AGM, please do join. I mean, even if you can't join us at the AGM on Saturday, I'm urging everybody possible to join. There are several reasons for that. One of them, obviously, is that we want as many members as possible. We're still pursuing affiliation to the Labour Party, and the more members we've got, the easier it is for us to persuade the Labour Party to allow us to affiliate. We have more leverage if we've got more members, and also we will have more sustainable ability to campaign if we've got a bit more money and can pay for additional support. Obviously, there's quite a few of us doing a lot of as much as we possibly can on a voluntary basis, but just occasionally you do need to be able to pay somebody to do something, and at the moment we can only afford 1 day a week, which is not very much. So please do join us, and just Google Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform. You'll find it easier that way than me trying to give you a link.
Great, thank you, Sandy. And yeah, if there's no other questions, I think we can. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you at the next one of these, which I think will probably be in a couple of months, or perhaps straight after the local elections. But we'll see where things get to and how many big developments there are in the meantime. But thank you very much in the meantime.